Ladies and gentlemen, what happens when the one who always loved you stops reacting and starts moving in silence? When her tears dry up, her voice disappears, and all you're left with is the echo of your own ego. She didn't stop caring. She stopped letting your chaos control her peace. And when silence replaces emotion, that's not weakness, that's power. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why losing her silence is louder than any goodbye. Chayuyuv. She cannot stop caring. She started than any goodbye. Chayuyuv. Because by the end of this, you'll understand why losing her silence is louder than any goodbye. Chayuyuv. We all start before we die. A woman who knows her worth doesn't seek validation from the world around her. She doesn't wait for someone to remind her of her value. She owns it every single day. When she walks into a room, she doesn't need to be loud to be noticed. Her presence speaks volumes. She understands that her confidence is not arrogance, is the result of surviving storms and still choosing to rise. She doesn't dim her light to make others comfortable, because she has learned the hard way that shrinking never leads to respect. This kind of inner strength unsettles people, especially those who rely on control. When a man's ego meets a woman who cannot be tamed or impressed by superficial charm, it triggers something unexpected. He sees in her a mirror reflecting his insecurities and weaknesses. Not because she's trying to hurt him, but because she refuses to be impressed by games. That refusal becomes her power. Confidence is not just about how she talks, walks, or dresses. It's about her silence, her decisions, her ability to walk away. When someone tries to disrespect her or play with her emotions, she doesn't retaliate with drama. She removes herself from the situation with grace and poise. And that silence becomes louder than any scream. And the grace and poise and that silence becomes louder than any scream. It confuses those who are used to chaos, those who thrive on emotional reactions. She's learned that emotional control is more powerful than any argument. When someone hurts her, she doesn't beg. She doesn't cry for closure. She becomes distant, cold, unreachable. And that shift is what cuts the deepest. People expect emotional women. They expect chaos. It leaves them speechless. When they find composure where they expected chaos, it leaves them speechless. That is the kind of confidence that turns the tables. Some people don't realize the value of someone until they feel their absence. And that absence, when it comes from someone who once cared deeply, is felt like a wound. It bruises the ego because it exposes the truth. You weren't as important as you thought. That's the silent message she sends when she walks away with dignity. Not to hurt, but to heal herself. Because she no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. She understands that anyone who needs to be reminded of her worth isn't meant to be close to her. This realization comes with experience, pain, and growth. And with that growth comes a new standard. One that refuses to entertain disrespect. She becomes emotionally unavailable to those who only offer confusion, and emotionally invested in herself. That shift in energy is her evolution. People often mistake kindness for weakness, but she knows the difference. She's kind, but not foolish. She gives second chances, but not third ones. She forgives, but never forgets. And most importantly, she learns. Every time someone tried to use her, she became wiser. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every disappointment became fuel for her strength. And eventually she learned that she doesn't need to convince anyone to stay. When people show her who they are, she believes them. She doesn't waste time trying to fix broken relationships or prove her loyalty to people who never valued it. That's not coldness. It's self-respect. It's the realization that you don't chase what's meant for you. And if someone leaves, they were never meant to stay. A man who tries to break a woman like this is only breaking his own image in her eyes. She sees right through false confidence, manipulation, and fragile egos. She's been there, dealt with it, and outgrown it. So when someone comes along thinking he can impress her with empty promises or superficial status, he fails. Because she doesn't care about appearances, she cares about consistency. And consistency is something egos often can't maintain. They are built on being admired, not challenged. But she challenges. She questions, she calls out red flags and walks away from them. Not because she enjoys conflict, but because she's finally protecting her peace. And that peace, it's her priority now. The moment someone tries to undermine her, thinking she'll stay just to feel wanted, they've already lost her. Because she doesn't crave attachment. She craves authenticity. She's walked through too much fire to settle for sparks. She has built a world where her happiness doesn't revolve around one person. She has found strength in solitude, power in patience, and clarity in silence. So when someone thinks they can control her by withholding affection or attention, it backfires. She doesn't play mind games. She doesn't chase. Instead, she observes, she listens, she waits, and then she decides. Her decisions aren't impulsive, they're deliberate. And once she's done, there's no turning back. Ego thrives on attention, on praise, on being needed. But when it meets someone who is impressed, it starts to unravel. That unraveling is subtle at first. A bit of confusion, a hint of frustration. But over time it becomes obsession. Why didn't she react? Why didn't she beg? Why is she okay without me? These are the questions that haunt the ego. Because the ego expects submission, not strength. And when strength stands firm, it exposes the ego's weakness. Suddenly the roles reverse. The one who is trying to dominate starts to feel dominated by the silence, the calm, the confidence. And that reversal, that's where her real power lies. She no longer falls for potential. She's done building men from scratch. If someone isn't already whole, she doesn't offer herself as the missing piece, because she's not a fixer. And now, she builds herself. Her dreams, her career, her peace of mind. She doesn't need to be someone's everything to feel complete. That kind of independence is intimidating, but it's also magnetic. It draws in those who are secure, stable, and self-aware. It repels those who are insecure, controlling, or emotionally immature. She's no longer attracted to intensity. She wants stability. She doesn't need fireworks. She wants foundation. That shift changes everything. People around her start noticing the change. She doesn't explain herself anymore. She doesn't overthink her words. She doesn't apologize for outgrowing people or places. And most importantly, she doesn't tolerate inconsistency. She's become a version of herself that she used to only dream of. A version that is calm, grounded, and unshakable. It wasn't easy. It took tears, betrayal, isolation, and healing. But now that she's here, there's no going back. And the people who once underestimated her, they start watching from a distance. Some with regret, some with admiration, but none with access. Because she's moved on to something higher, self-respect. Every time she's tried to shrink to fit someone else's version of love, it broke her a little. But now, she refuses to shrink. She expands. She glows. She lives fully, boldly, without apology. She knows that hurting a fragile ego might make someone leave. But if they stay, it's because they've grown. And if they leave, it's because they were never strong enough to stand beside her. Either way, she wins. Because she's no longer driven by fear of being alone. She's driven by the desire to be true to herself. And that desire is louder than any ego, stronger than any heartbreak, and deeper than any illusion of love. Men are often drawn to charm, beauty, and warmth, but those are just the surface layers. What truly captures a man's mind and holds his attention is something deeper. The challenge. Not the kind born from playing games, but the kind that comes from presence. When someone carries themselves with confidence and self-respect, they don't need to prove their worth. Their standards speak louder than their words. That silent strength becomes magnetic. When boundaries are firmly set and self-worth isn't negotiable, it creates a different kind of attraction. Not one based on temporary thrills, but on long-term intrigue. A person who can't be easily swayed commands curiosity, and curiosity turns into respect. When someone is used to being praised and admired without effort, encountering resistance feels foreign. It forces reflection. There's something about not getting immediate approval that pushes someone to evaluate their own actions. Ego hates rejection, but growth often begins there. Being told no, or seeing someone unbothered by status or charm chips away at the mask. The games that once worked now fall flat. The smiles that once disarmed now receive no special treatment. That's where the shift happens, where attraction moves from superficiality to admiration. It's not about being cruel or distant, it's about not settling for less than one deserves. And that standard becomes unforgettable. A fragile ego depends on power and predictability. When someone becomes unpredictable, when they react with calm indifference instead of emotional outbursts, it creates discomfort. And in that discomfort lies a mirror. Every silent treatment, every attempt at control, every backhanded compliment gets met with poise. That refusal to play the expected role forces growth or distance. Either way, it creates a shift. The person on the receiving end starts asking themselves why their usual moves aren't working. The answer is simple. They're not dealing with someone who seeks validation. They're facing someone who holds the pen to their own story and refuses to let anyone rewrite it. True strength isn't about domination, it's about discipline. There's immense power in being emotionally composed when the situation begs for reaction. When someone walks away instead of arguing, it leaves a louder message than any shouted words. Silence isn't emptiness, it's power contained. It speaks of clarity, maturity, and self-respect. This kind of strength invites a different kind of relationship. One not built on ego, but on mutual value. In that space, manipulation has no home. Instead of controlling, one must now connect. Instead of demanding attention, one must earn trust. That shift isn't easy for everyone, but once it happens, it transforms not just the relationship, but the individual. Respect doesn't grow in spaces where admiration is handed out for free. It thrives in the presence of boundaries. When someone refuses to tolerate inconsistency, it sends a message. I value myself too much to settle for confusion. That message lands differently depending on the listener. Some walk away, offended that they couldn't bend the rules. Others stay, compelled by the integrity. Ego feels bruised, but soul feels challenged. And while a bruised ego runs, a challenged soul grows. That's the difference between attraction that fades and respect that lasts. The former seeks attention, the latter seeks alignment. And in that space, true connection begins. Every time someone refuses to tolerate games, they level the playing field. When emotions are not used as bargaining chips, but are treated with maturity, it disarms manipulation. Suddenly, the emotional leverage is gone. The power dynamic shifts. The person who once thought they held control now has to rise to the occasion. Because there is no more room for entitlement, no more room for disrespect disguised as affection. The only currency that matters now is consistency, presence, emotional availability, and those who can't offer it either evolve or exit. That filter is not cruelty, it's clarity, and clarity attracts what chaos cannot. When attention is no longer the goal and authenticity becomes the standard, relationships take on a new shape. They stop revolving around control and start revolving around connection. Haha. And that's why, if feminists are not going to revolve into connect, that connection requires accountability. A fragile ego cannot survive in the presence of accountability because it requires honesty and humility. But someone seeking real depth begins to see the value. The one who once felt offended by boundaries now feels inspired by them. Because true strength invites others to rise, not retreat. It calls people out of their comfort zones and into their better selves. That's not just motivation, that's transformation. And it doesn't come from pleasing others. It comes from being whole. When someone realizes they can't manipulate, they start to reflect. It might not happen overnight. At first there's frustration, even denial. But in the silence that follows, something deeper stirs. A question arises. Why am I reacting this way? Why do I feel so exposed, so unsettled? That's the ego cracking. That's the beginning of awareness. And once awareness enters, there's no going back. What once felt like rejection begins to feel like redirection. That mirror, though uncomfortable, becomes a path to self-discovery. The very challenge they resisted becomes the very catalyst for their growth. And that journey began not with conflict, but with courage. Attraction that's based on flattery is fleeting, but attraction based on depth is unforgettable. People don't stay for surface-level beauty or charm. They stay for the ones who make them think, who make them grow, who make them better. That doesn't mean tolerating bad behavior or sacrificing self-worth. It means refusing to be easy to win and impossible to keep. It means setting a bar so high that only the genuinely committed can reach it, and in doing so, creating a space where only real connection can survive. It means setting a bar so high that only the genuinely committed can reach it, and in doing so, creating a space where only real connection can reach it. It means setting a bar so high that only the committed can reach it. It means setting a bar so high that space doesn't attract everyone, but it attracts the right ones. The ones who don't want to win games, they want to build something real. Every time ego is challenged with strength, a choice is offered: evolve or escape. Some will run, some will blame, some will call it attitude, but those who are truly ready will rise. Because deep down, they recognize the value